So, Darlene, thank you so much for making time to share your insights into the future of leadership. But before we go into the future, can you tell us a little bit about your own background? Where did you grow up?
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Dr. Nick. So I was born and bred in Zimbabwe. I come from Kadoma, which is a small town in Mashonaland West. I came to South Africa 22 years ago, actually 1998, and I did the rest of my tertiary education here.
Right, and tell us, what was your dream career when you grew up?
Sure. That's $1 million question. So yeah, growing up, Dr. Nick, I was not sure at all. I think I played around with a lot of thoughts and a lot of ideas, beginning from the security base of perhaps being a nurse or being a teacher or being a flight attendant, based on what I saw around me in terms of the choice of career, like for my mom, my dad. However, I leaned more on an office job without actually knowing in which area I would land up. One thing that I remember is that my mom kept on saying, you know, I should get into a career with the security, you know, perhaps like teaching or nursing, but I think this is more from the generation of who they were and the background that they came from. So I considered that. But yeah, that didn't come to fruition. I did apply for nursing, but I wasn't accepted in. I applied to be a flight attendant. I also wasn't accepted in. Yeah, and the funny thing is, I went on to do a top flight executive secretarial course. It was actually called top flight executive secretarial course, after completing my A levels, because at that time in Zim, I did not have enough points to get me into University of Zimbabwe, which was the main university then. And yeah, and I didn't think that I would end up where I am today, like in terms of knowing the order, but I had a hunger to do more, and I knew that I could do much more. You know, I was not totally satisfied that this would be the ultimate career of choice, but I was on a journey and I'd opened myself up to saying, let me take the first step, and then I'll see where this actually would land me.
And tell us, Darlene, who inspired you in your early days?
I've actually had different people inspire me at different stages of my life. And the three that stand out for me, starting off with my parents, particularly the conversations that I had with my mom. Growing up, I imagined different scenarios of my life in terms of how they would turn out. And based on the conversations that we had each time, you know, I would have different thoughts, different wishes, different dreams, and I would speak these out. And really, what I remember vividly is the encouragement that I would get. And really the art of seeing the possibility of all these dreams coming true. You know, so, and I think my mom always encouraged me to say, continue to dream and, you know, pray about it. It will be, there's nothing that stands in your way really except yourself. So I kept on, I think, you know, you're almost excited in your own imaginations, because that would keep me going, you know, when you're then growing up. And then secondly was the time that I was now doing the top flight secretarial course at a college called BIC College. And the principal and the owner of that college really played a critical and integral part in my life, because she saw greatness in me and the ability to be able to do more. So she dared me to dream big. So after completing those studies, she actually encouraged me to say, you must register for a degree in accounting or finance. And this was because I had passed my accounting with A grades. And she saw a bright future in that. And added to that, she then also asked me if I could teach accounting at a college, you know, in part-time. And for me, I think that literally blew my mind, because I hadn't seen myself in that, like an ability to teach, as well as the fact that I could actually then register for an accounting degree based on the backdrop that I just spoke about earlier, that I hadn't had sufficient points that would lead me to get into a straight degree at that time. So that literally changed the way that I saw things, because I began to dream bigger and to actually see the possibility of it coming true, you know. And I think another thing that that she played an integral part was she landed me my first job. You know, I was a student of the year at the college, and she helped to land me this job. So that really boosted, I think, my confidence and my drive. And then the third person that I want to mention is a guy who employed me in South Africa. This was my first job in South Africa when I came in 1998. And he gave me the opportunity to actually enter the marketplace. At that time, the company was called Black Like Me. Black Like Me had actually entered into a JV with Colgate-Palmolive, and he was the finance director there. His name is Kamal Chakrabarti. He's now in the US. But you know, what was amazing was that he hired me as his PA, but he didn't focus on me doing PA duties. He actually focused on teaching me the work that he did and how I could assist him in that work rather than the normal PA duties. And he also loved the idea that by then I was studying and I had registered for that BCom in finance degree that my old principal had spoken about. But I was really at the initial phase of my degree, but he believed in me and he encouraged me and he told me success stories that really, really made me go for it, you know. And he connected me at the time to his wife, who was also studying at the same institution that I was studying at. And yeah, and that just encouraged us, and we shared notes and we shared, you know, our study programs. And today she's gone on to, you know, attain her PhD and is a professor in the US. So that really encouraged me and yeah, made me see that the sky was indeed the limits. So right. Yeah, I didn't start from there.
Now, Darlene, you spent 10 years at ABSA and later on Barclays, especially in customer experience and business banking. Can you tell us a little bit about the highlights of your ABSA and Barclays career?
Okay, that's lovely. So the highlight, I think, for me was really the all-rounded experience that I got, because when I got into ABSA, I think I did 4 roles within the span of the 10 years, which started off with big, you know, a technical mastery in one field, and then I went on to transactional banking, then I went on to private banking, and then I ended up now in the field of where I currently am, which is client experience. And I think each phase for me brought about a new experience as though I was actually in a different company. And that really helped to shape up my whole banking knowledge. And yeah, and it just really feels like I have done the end-to-end aspects of banking. So I really am appreciative of the overall experience that I got to work for this different company, so to speak, in that I was given the opportunity to do different roles and actually enter into domains that I had not studied for, so to speak. Because if you look at the whole client experience philosophy that I've then gone on to learn and master, I didn't study for that. I actually studied finance and business, you know, and yet I guess the general knowledge and the hunger and the drive, you know, have brought about that overall ability to be able to execute in these different roles.
And Darlene, you also earned a PhD, I believe, in microfinance. Can you tell us a little bit more about the study and the findings of your PhD?
Okay, thank you. So yeah, so my PhD was basically in business management with a focus on financial inclusion. And yeah, the aspects of that, of financial inclusion didn't start with my PhD. It actually started with my master's. So with my master's, I actually looked at an opportunity for low-income housing, an opportunity, yeah, for basically the low-income market rather, and how they could enter into that space and use the whole aspects of private land, private investors, government subsidies, and how that could then solve for the phenomena of housing for the low-income people. And I took then that to a different level now of creating financial inclusivity when it came to the aspect of creating a ladder effect. Because I think ordinarily when you look at banking tools and the whole aspects of transactional banking, it's got certain systems in place, and it's got a certain target market, and it would ordinarily exclude the peculiar ones when it comes to things like collateral. So I then explored the whole aspect of using the untraditional methods like land within the rural areas as collateral perhaps, but in the modern space. So how do you, how are you able to actually get into the opportunity to get a secured loan and actually transform, let's assume, your village back there, which wouldn't be ordinarily seen as a lucrative asset within the urban areas? And I was looking at that in terms of, and focusing on it from who is the client at the center, and the client is this person who does not have the ordinary opportunity. And what is then that system that we can put around them? And I devised this triangular effect of, you can have the government, you can have the person, you can have the corporate organizations, as well as have trade unions, in order to support and to bring about a solution for the previously disadvantaged people.
So Darlene, looking back over your career, would you say there was a major turning point?
The turning point in my career, I think, was when I got into banking at Standard Bank, and that was in 2005. And again, here, I want to thank a particular person, Annette Custons, who gave me a chance when I knew nothing about banking besides the theoretical knowledge of business, really, that I gained through my degree. Yeah, but she believed that I was the right candidate for the job, and she took me under her wings. And yeah, and I embraced the challenge, and I took it on with both hands. And here I am 16 years later. I've grown in leaps and bounds, and I'm still in banking to this day.
So Darlene, what is driving you today?
I'm driven by the desire to make a difference and to be the difference and to see the impact of what I'm implementing today and how it stands in good ground to lay a foundation for the future. I am really interested in laying a foundation for future generations in a number of domains, like the one of financial inclusivity that I just mentioned through the study that I did, and to create that ladder effect and create opportunities by not using ordinary collateral or the widely accepted transactional tools of trade.
Now, Darlene, let's go into leadership. And I know it's a big question, but what does the future of leadership mean to you?
Dr. Nick, I'll start off by making a disclaimer that leadership is a very complex and often misconstrued word and subject. Often I think we construe positions of authority, whether they're political, whether they're social or business, to automatically bestow leadership. In my view, that's not to say that the former and the latter are mutually exclusive, but certainly history teaches us that the former does not automatically lead to the latter, and the onus on any of us in appointed, elected, and other positions who have responsibility to lead is to be aware and to take that simple reality seriously for us to be called leaders. The future of leadership, to me, speaks to leaders that are agile, adaptable, and that walk in authenticity. Change agility and adaptive leadership is arguably more important than a proven track record of accomplishment. Future leaders are needing agility in thinking. When faced with a crisis, Dr. Nick, like we are currently in, how do you cannot actually look at old ways of doing things and what you have done in the past, but rather what the future is requiring. Future leaders will need to be more resilient and lead teams much more effectively. And I think a very important aspect that I really love and always speak to is the one of authentic leadership. And understanding of what this looks like in a time of crisis is important. Leaders must be vulnerable and be open to other ideas. They must have a sense of direction linked to some sort of North Star, and may and will not necessarily have all the answers, but at the same time, they won't be clueless. History will not necessarily be a safety net for future leaders. So how do they then learn to navigate and maneuver through that? Because history does not necessarily shape the future, but it's okay to maybe refer to. So I guess in that space now, leaders will have to look at other ways of finding answers and comfort and leaning into different ways where they'll be able to garner new skills that they can then adopt.
And Darlene, what have you learned from your own journey that you consider most important for building future leaders? What are those building blocks?
Okay. From my own journey, Dr. Nick, I think it's important to ensure that you are laying a foundation for others to build on and to create a ladder so that they can step up with you. You cannot go on the journey alone. And it's important to bet on what is unconventional, as I alluded to earlier, when it comes to the form shape of future leaders based on potential rather than attitude. I'm a true believer and an advocate of this, that if you can bet on potential and attitude and grow that, and that grows into capability, and not necessarily be led by one's current ability, because the current ability can reduce over time. But the other two, which is potential and attitude, they can keep growing and they can lead to increased capability. I strongly believe and I subscribe to that.
Darlene, when you speak to aspiring leaders, what is it you tell them about social media? How should they navigate social media to build their own personal brand?
Oh, I'm not really a good case when it comes to the use of social media, but I think the focus should all be about value-adding branding. Otherwise, it becomes all about a person with nothing that adds value to the community or society. You know, so within that place, perhaps I think to start off with is that understanding of what do you want to mirror, or what is that you mirror by what you're posting. So leaders must be all about solving for something on their social media platforms based on what they want to represent, and they have an ability to test it with an audience that is based on their leadership ethos. Is it uplifting? Is it thought-provoking? Is it philanthropic, etc.? And I think there's then the question of saying, am I wanting to follow the hype in terms of what other people do, or am I wanting to be a voice in my area of expertise? So social media definitely has a place. The problem is, can you influence your audience, and with what are you going to influence them? And I think there are some questions to answer to in terms of what is the brand that I represent? What is my target audience? What type of person will be the consistent consumer of what I represent? And am I ready then to make that long-term commitment to it? Because that would require me to keep my content fresh. So, and I think it's that aspect of saying, if you don't keep your content fresh, other people will then speak on your behalf, which can tarnish the brand that you were trying to establish in the first place. So I'm certainly not averse to it, but based on the thoughts about that I've shared, I'm working on positioning myself to what I want to represent and to make the long-term commitment to be growing in that.
And Darlene, what is your advice for future leaders? What are some of the biggest challenges they should expect to encounter in their career?
I think future leaders will most likely encounter the same challenges that all leaders have always encountered. If you think about it, Dr. Nick, the only thing that changes is technology, as we now call it. But we do not lead machines and computers, do we? So we lead people. So it follows that leadership challenges are as perennial as the grass, and I would not presume to write a prescription for future leaders. Suffice to say that if they choose to ignore what mistakes have occurred in the past, we are guaranteed that they will happen again. One of the biggest challenges that I see that future leaders will face is to make a distinction between authority, influence, power, fame, and leadership. This goes back to the authentic leadership I mentioned before. As in, being leaders of the future will be about being consistent, being selfless, being fair, being transparent, and being visionary, but at the same time adaptive, as in how the vision is accepted, and owned by the relevant stakeholders. With the advent and proliferation of internet and information, we can all accept that the days of draconian autocracy are now in the past, really. And another important aspect is one of effectively using an entrepreneurial mindset in the corporate arena and change management, perhaps from an acceptance of technology and the integration of different generations in the marketplace. Majority of leaders lack the skill to lead, to change, and to have a mindset that is geared to adopt new technology whilst embracing the differences of the mixed generations within the marketplace. Another critical thing that I'm thinking about right now, Dr. Nick, that we're faced with is when we're looking at the current space that we are in now, there comes a new skill in terms of working from wherever, whenever, and maybe it could be forever. So in this challenge, there sits a new skill, because in this space, a leader must move from hierarchical order to a place more flexible, where you allow teams to be self-directed rather than you physically seeing people. It's a move from a culture of command and control to one of self-leading and self-managing teams. So leaders will have to learn to let go and create capabilities within teams and people authority to make decisions, but hold people accountable along the journey and build appropriate frameworks, you know, and have the clear parameters without obviously giving too much leeway that takes away accountability. But with this obviously comes performance management through contractual agreement that is activity-based on output versus input. So outcome-based management whilst giving autonomy. You know, this is very, very important for me. And it's about that part of saying, as a leader, then you guide through the strategic intent, you give the broad parameters, and individuals who manage the day-to-day activities. So, you know, you give them the tools, you let them drive, and work then becomes intertwined with life. It's not about a work-life balance, but the two become merged. And it's really a dance that allows people to work to the rhythm of their dance. And this will lead people to feel connected to the purpose of the organization. And it brings in the best and well-choreographed dance of integrating leadership, culture, and brand. And I think my last point on that is really that part of saying, Dr. Nick, that obsession of corporates in terms of, you know, how things have been will not necessarily work, but it's more about creating the connectedness that people can really believe in. So what do we want our people to be connected to? To us, to the brand? Because we must build a purpose that makes sense, that people can resonate and can connect to, and not be fixated on traditional ways of leading.
And tell us, Darlene, if you were to design a curriculum for future leaders, what are some of the new skills that you would like to factor in?
I think some of the new skills, it's really about adopting a technological and digital mindset that is complementary to humans. You know, and I think we need to have coach champions and facilitators that speaks to the aspects that give rise to an ability to demonstrate the suite of next generation leadership competencies, such as cognitive readiness skills, critical thinking, emotional and social intelligence, you know, the competencies that really include empathy and relationship management, and ones that really speak to making leaders whole in how they lead and not necessarily hold one aspect of a competence. Leaders must definitely, I think, galvanize the collective knowledge. So part of that would be the whole part of really enabling and teaching leaders to use the intelligence of everyone around them. And that is a new skill in itself, because it speaks to, and it speaks to really how it and contributes to effective leadership. So you would almost start off with the premise that in a room, the answers are definitely sitting there because of the power of the collective. But linking back to my authentic leadership points that I alluded to earlier, you know, it's almost like mind the collective genius scenario. And in this, you'll ensure that everybody has a voice. And this is really an important aspect of diversity and inclusion, the power of the collective. And I think another critical point is really adopting an entrepreneurial mindset. And I think I spoke to that earlier as a leadership trait. And this is different to business acumen. Because the question is business acumen still that important? Or is it an entrepreneurial mindset, perhaps that is possibly more than business acumen? Because it is more encompassing and it brings a well-rounded view of leadership ability. So an entrepreneurial mindset, in my mind, is always about thinking of new opportunities that may arise in unconventional ways. It's about the different platforms, how you can make use of them, different mindsets, again, speaking to that diversity and inclusion, different communities that you can tap into, different audiences that one can approach. You know, so an entrepreneurial mindset is more about thinking in the long term and flipping what you do in a different way. So it's always, you know, I love it. Actually, it reminds me of what one of my colleagues always says, that it's about the ABT principle. So always be thinking. And it allows you to really try things, fail, and you move ahead. But you feel empowered to think and to suggest and to implement things. I think another maybe lasting point will be that leaders must operate and embrace their whole self, so to speak, and what others may term cognitive, emotive, and intuition. In other words, this is the use of the head or the mind, the heart, and the gut or the instinct. You know, so sometimes you need to be led by the head or the mind, but sometimes you need to be led by the heart, and sometimes you need to be led by your gut. But there are shortcomings in merely using one aspect of this, as in if you just use the head or if you just use the heart. But you need to be comfortable as a leader to trust the multifaceted dimension that could drive all these three elements and develop all three to become more rounded and well-grounded. Think about, you know, this triangular part, that sometimes rational thinking does not work on its own. Go to instincts. You know, so it's really, I think, one of the key things that will bring about effective competencies that will make well-rounded leaders that will be able to stand the test of time and the test of whatever technology and digital aspects may bring along.
And Darlene, as a mentor to future leaders, can you maybe share a success story or two where you mentored an upcoming leader and that person took your advice to heart?
Yeah, you know, I think I have a lot of, quite a number of stories, but I want to start off with maybe a basic one where in my career and journey of life, there was a time when I owned two businesses. I owned actually a nail bar and a beauty salon. And I took on a lady that did not have any qualification at all. And so I took her on as a cleaner. So she used to come and sweep the floors and make tea for the clients. But she was so eager to learn. And she asked if, when the shop was not busy, if she could actually sit and watch the nail technicians doing customers' nails. And I thought, okay, by all means do that. So she did that, and then before time, whenever she was not, when the shop was not busy, she would then begin to try out on her own hands to do a nail or two. And then she began to practice on the others. You know, she sharpened the skill and she became the best nail technician within my business. You know, and I think what I then loved is she went on, so after I sold the businesses, she left, she went to work on cruise ships, and later she owned her own business. Until today, she owns a number of businesses in this domain. So I think when I look at that, it's about, okay, you groom someone, you give an opportunity, and again, it speaks to that part of you bet on the unconventional. She was not trained for it. And another example is where I took one administrator when I was working at Absam. We had come in as a learner and was just doing the general administration within the department. You know, all the odd jobs really is what she was doing. But she was also very keen to learn. And yeah, so then we spoke and she was really interested about learning about this whole phenomenon of client experience. So then, yeah, I gave her the challenge of saying, I'm willing to to let you get an opportunity as long as you can manage your existing administration tasks. Then we'll take you under the wings, and we started off with the component of, okay, let's work through what is the whole domain of complaints all about. How do we manage them end to end? How do we identify root causes in that? And she began to learn all the aspects of what is client experience within the business. What does it stand for, and how do we actually manage this whole aspect? And she went on to really thrive. And from complaints, she learned the whole measurement and management framework. And today she's a client experience specialist, and she has grown steadily in that role. She worked hard, she believed she could, and she did. So I think, I look at that and I think, wow, it's all about looking at the people that ordinarily can be overlooked, and you take them under your wings and you develop them. And I think one thing that I thrive on is somebody else betted on me. How do I also bet on others?
And Darlene, in your leadership journey and maybe in your learning journey, who are the role models of leadership that you would recommend future leaders should study and learn from?
I think here as well, there are quite a number, but I think Simon Sinek really, really inspired me. So Simon Sinek has got that whole message or the talk on start with the why in mind. And this has stuck with me over the years and continues to help me navigate, and go through all my plans and desires, because it helps me to answer to the why in line with my purpose, in line with my beliefs, in line with the cause. One thing that I really love about this aspect of the why and how it shaped me and continues to shape me is that it brings about the conviction part of why I am doing something, why I believe in something. And I think that if we go back to what I spoke about earlier on leadership, on authentic leadership, it brings success to an organization's objectives when this is clear, because it enables buy-in and it brings in the conviction, and it speaks to authentic leadership, which is an integral attribute that is needed to be an effective leader, who people will willingly follow. Unlike if you only focus on output, because it will be a hard sell, so to speak. And then I think locally, Dr. Nick, I want to really give honor where it's due and acknowledge a guy called Andre Schroeder. And he's an SME in client experience. And his focus is really around customer experience measurement and management. So the whole framework around that. And he helped to ground my initial knowledge of client experience just when I needed it most, when I had entered into that space. It's important to find mentors and coaches who will help you along the journey. He is a thought leader in that space, and he passionately shared his knowledge and ensured that other people were given the opportunity to enter that space, and he provided formal learning and training and really created other advocates and evangelists within that area. So I'm truly grateful for that. And going on to, I think leading on from there, lastly, is once that foundation had been built in the client experience domain, and once I was already, grounded in this space, I opened myself to continued learning and growth. And I came across another great thought leader, Steve Towers, who's the founder of the BP group, which is Business Process Group. And he's also a great coach and mentor who added to my growth and knowledge and brought a full shaping into where I am today in client experience with his methodology and frameworks in this domain. The outside-in philosophy, which speaks to putting the client at the center of all that an organization does. Again, for me, this speaks to the why that I spoke to earlier. And in my mind, it helps to drive purpose by delivering those successful customer outcomes, which is the reason for existence really for most companies. So I think, to just name those for now, they've really been instrumental in shaping where I am today.
And Darlene, how can our listeners connect with you, and where should they follow you?
They can connect with me on LinkedIn, Dr. Nick. I'm not very active on it, but I'm starting here. yeah, to really just create thought leadership in this space.
And last but not least, Darlene, is there one piece of advice that you would really like to convey to future leaders that they should implement in their own leadership?
I think well-balanced leaders who will stand in good stead in the future more than technical mastery experts. So I think my advice would be invest in personal development and growth in order to make yourself a well-rounded whole leader. One part of mastery will not make you whole. Embrace your full self and you'll be very successful.
Well, Darlene, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your wisdom into the future of leadership and reminding us that authentic leadership is the heart and core of the future of leadership.
100%. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Dr. Nick. I really appreciate it.